Urgent. God says your soulmate is coming back today. My beloved child, listen carefully. Don't skip. Stay till the end, because this story begins on a day that seemed completely ordinary, yet it would become one of the most unforgettable days in a person's life. The morning sun rose as it always had. The streets slowly filled with people hurrying toward work, families prepared for another routine day, and birds welcomed the dawn with their familiar songs. Nothing appeared unusual on the outside. Yet deep inside one heart, something was changing. For months they had carried questions they could never answer, memories they could never erase, and hopes they had almost convinced themselves to release. They had prayed countless times, asking God not only to heal their relationships but also to heal their own heart. This story is not about a guaranteed reunion. It is about what happens when faith begins to replace fear and hope returns after a long season of waiting. What happened next changed everything. For a long time they had believed silence meant the story was over. Every unanswered message felt like another closed door. Every passing week convinced them that perhaps some chapters were never meant to continue. They smiled in front of others, but every quiet evening reminded them of conversations they wished had ended differently. They replayed old memories, wondering whether one different decision could have changed everything. Yet with every prayer, God was gently teaching them a lesson they could not yet understand. Sometimes healing must happen within both people before any relationship can move forward in a healthy way. Listen carefully, because this changes everything. One evening they opened their Bible to Psalm 46 verse 10, "Be still, and know that I am God." Those simple words reached places in their heart that no conversation ever had. They realized they had been trying to control every outcome instead of trusting God with what they could not see. They quietly prayed, "Father, if this relationship belongs in my future, prepare both of us. And if you have another path for me, give me the courage to walk it with peace." For the first time in many months, they stopped asking God to hurry. They started asking Him to make them wiser, kinder, and more patient. Days turned into weeks. Instead of checking their phone every few minutes, they began living more fully. They reconnected with family members they had unintentionally neglected. They volunteered at a community center, where they discovered the joy of helping others without expecting anything in return. They laughed more. They prayed more. They worried less. Slowly, their identity stopped depending on whether one person returned. It became rooted in knowing they were deeply loved by God. That change did not erase every difficult emotion, but it gave them strength to move forward one faithful step at a time. Don't skip. Stay till the end, because another beautiful chapter is about to unfold. One rainy afternoon they met an elderly couple sitting together beneath the shelter of a small cafe. The husband gently held his wife's hand while they shared a simple cup of tea. Curious, they smiled and asked how they had stayed together for so many years. The elderly man answered softly, "Real love isn't built by never facing storms. It's built by learning to walk through them together with honesty, forgiveness, and God's help." Those words remained in their heart long after they walked away. They realized lasting relationships are not sustained by dramatic emotions alone. They are strengthened by daily choices to love with humility, patience, and grace. My beloved child, another quiet miracle was unfolding, not outside, but inside. They stopped measuring every day by whether they received a message. Instead, they measured each day by whether they had become more compassionate than yesterday, more forgiving than yesterday, and more faithful than yesterday. Every sunrise became another opportunity to grow into the person God was shaping them to become. They discovered that true healing is not forgetting the past. It is allowing God to transform the past into wisdom that prepares us for the future. Then, one ordinary afternoon, something unexpected happened. Their phone vibrated. For a brief moment their heart raced. They took a deep breath before looking at the screen. The message was simple, respectful, and sincere. It did not magically erase every misunderstanding or instantly restore every broken feeling. Instead, it opened the door to an honest conversation that both people had avoided for far too long. There were apologies. There was listening. There were tears. There was gratitude. Most importantly, there was a shared willingness to move forward with humility rather than pride. Whether their relationship would ultimately be restored was still uncertain, but both had changed in ways that made genuine healing possible. Listen carefully, because this changes everything. They finally understood that the greatest answer to prayer is not always receiving exactly what we asked for on the day we asked for it. Sometimes the answer begins with God changing our own heart first. When hearts become healthier, conversations become kinder. When pride is replaced by humility, reconciliation becomes possible. When forgiveness replaces resentment, new beginnings can emerge. Even if relationships take unexpected paths, God can bring purpose, growth, and peace through every season. My beloved child, as this chapter comes to a close, remember the deepest truth this story offers. Never build your hope on a countdown, a prediction, or a guarantee about tomorrow. Build your hope on the unchanging faithfulness of God. He sees every tear, hears every sincere prayer, and walks beside you through every season of waiting. Sometimes relationships are beautifully restored. Sometimes people grow in different directions. In every case, God's invitation remains the same: to live with faith, to love with integrity, to forgive generously, and to trust Him with the future. Walk forward with courage, knowing that no season of sincere prayer is wasted. The most beautiful chapter of your life may not be the one you expect, but it can still be filled with healing, wisdom, purpose, and enduring hope. And wherever the road leads, the author of your story has not finished writing yet. My beloved child, listen carefully, because this chapter begins the morning after that unexpected conversation. Don't skip. Stay till the end, because the words that were spoken did not magically erase the past, but they opened a door that had been closed for far too long. Both people walked away carrying something they had not felt in months: hope. Not the kind of hope built on promises that no one could guarantee, but the quiet hope that grows when honesty finally replaces silence. They realized that healing rarely arrives in one dramatic moment. It usually begins with one truthful conversation, one sincere apology, one act of forgiveness, and one humble decision to keep moving forward. What happened next changed everything. As the sun rose over the quiet streets, they found themselves smiling without even realizing it. For so long they had imagined every possible conversation in their mind, yet the real one had been simpler than expected. There were no perfect speeches. There were no impossible promises. There were only two people willing to admit that fear had kept them apart longer than either of them wanted. They understood that pride had built walls, but humility had begun building a bridge. That bridge would take time to strengthen, yet for the first time it existed. Listen carefully, because this changes everything. Instead of rushing into decisions, they both agreed to move carefully. They wanted trust to grow naturally rather than forcing everything back to the way it once was. They spent time listening more than speaking. They asked questions instead of making assumptions. They learned that understanding another person's heart requires patience, kindness, and a willingness to hear even the difficult truths. Every conversation became another opportunity to replace old misunderstandings with new wisdom. My beloved child, one evening they met at a quiet park where they had once shared many happy memories. The same trees still stood tall. The same gentle breeze moved through the leaves. Yet they were no longer the same people who had once walked those paths. Life had changed them. Waiting had changed them. Prayer had changed them. They spoke honestly about the mistakes they had both made. Instead of blaming one another, they accepted responsibility for their own actions. That moment became the beginning of genuine healing because lasting relationships are built on truth, not on pretending the past never happened. Stay till the end, because another beautiful lesson quietly unfolded. Before they parted that evening, one of them softly said, "I don't want us to repeat yesterday's mistakes. If we are going to walk forward, let's do it with honesty, patience, and respect." Those simple words carried more meaning than grand declarations ever could. They understood that love is not proven by dramatic moments alone. It is revealed through daily choices to remain faithful, communicate openly, forgive quickly, and treat one another with compassion. Days slowly turned into weeks. There were still moments of uncertainty. There were still conversations that required courage. But each challenge became another opportunity to grow rather than another reason to walk away. Whenever fear tried to return, they paused, prayed, and chose wisdom instead of reacting with anger. They discovered that peace grows where humility is welcomed and where both people are willing to learn from the past instead of being controlled by it. Listen carefully, because another truth is beginning to shine. They realized that the greatest miracle was not simply finding each other again. The greater miracle was becoming healthier people than they had been before. They had learned patience through waiting, compassion through pain, gratitude through loss, and faith through uncertainty. Whether their future together would continue for many years was something only time could reveal, but they now understood that every healthy relationship begins with two hearts committed to growing in love, grace, and integrity. Don't skip this final moment, because another chapter is still waiting beyond today's page. This story is not about a guaranteed ending. It is about the courage to begin again with wisdom instead of fear. Every sunrise now reminds them that relationships flourish when they are nurtured with honesty, forgiveness, respect, and hope. They continue placing each new day into God's hands, trusting Him to guide their steps and shape their hearts. And as they walk forward together, one conversation, one prayer, and one act of kindness at a time, they discover that the strongest love is not the love that never faces difficulty. It is the love that chooses truth over pride, grace over resentment, and hope over despair. With every faithful step, a new chapter unfolds, and the author of their story continues writing a future filled with purpose, healing, and enduring peace. My beloved child, listen carefully, because this chapter begins several weeks after that first honest conversation. Don't skip. Stay till the end, because something even more powerful was beginning to happen. The silence that once created distance had been replaced by quiet understanding. There were still unanswered questions, but they no longer created fear. Instead, they became opportunities to trust God one day at a time. Both hearts had discovered that genuine love cannot be rushed, and true healing cannot be forced. It grows slowly, like a seed planted deep beneath the soil, invisible at first but becoming stronger with every passing day. What happened next changed everything. One evening, as the golden light of sunset stretched across the sky, they found themselves walking along a peaceful riverside path. They spoke about the dreams they had once hidden from each other. They shared the fears they had never admitted. There were moments of laughter that reminded them of happier days, but there were also moments of silence that spoke louder than words. Neither of them felt the need to pretend anymore. They had learned that vulnerability is not weakness. It is the birthplace of trust. Listen carefully, because this changes everything. As they continued walking, one of them quietly stopped and looked toward the sky. "Do you know what I've learned?" they whispered. "I spent so much time praying for God to bring someone back into my life that I forgot to thank Him for changing my own heart." Those words hung in the air for a long moment. Tears filled both of their eyes because they realized that the greatest miracle was not simply meeting again. The miracle was becoming people capable of loving with greater patience, wisdom, and grace than before. Days continued to pass, and they refused to let excitement replace wisdom. Instead of making promises they could not keep, they chose honesty. Instead of hiding difficult emotions, they spoke openly with kindness. They prayed before making important decisions. They learned that every healthy relationship requires daily commitment, mutual respect, forgiveness, and humility. Their conversations became deeper because they were no longer trying to impress one another. They were simply trying to understand one another. My beloved child, another unforgettable lesson quietly unfolded during the following month. One Sunday morning, they attended church together for the first time in a long while. As the congregation sang songs of hope and gratitude, they realized how much they had both grown through seasons of waiting. The message that day was not about romance or perfect endings. It was about God's faithfulness through every chapter of life. They left the service understanding that no relationship should replace their relationship with God. Instead, every healthy relationship should encourage both people to grow in faith, kindness, and love. Stay till the end, because another beautiful moment is about to unfold. Before saying goodbye that evening, they stood beneath a sky filled with countless stars. There were no dramatic speeches or impossible promises. One of them simply smiled and said, "Whatever tomorrow brings, I'm grateful we chose honesty instead of silence." The other quietly replied, "And I'm grateful God taught us how to grow before bringing our paths together again." Those simple words carried more meaning than anything either of them had imagined months earlier. Listen carefully, because another truth is beginning to shine. life still brought challenges. There were busy days, unexpected disappointments, and moments when fear tried to return. But now they faced those moments differently. Instead of allowing fear to separate them, they chose conversation. Instead of assuming the worst, they chose patience. Instead of reacting with anger, they paused, prayed, and sought wisdom. Little by little, trust became stronger than doubt. As another season quietly arrived, they realized that love is not proven by dramatic declarations made in emotional moments. Love is revealed by showing up consistently, speaking truth with kindness, keeping promises, offering forgiveness, and choosing faithfulness every ordinary day. Those quiet choices became the strongest foundation they had ever built. Don't skip this final moment, because another chapter is already waiting beyond today's page. This story has never been about guaranteed outcomes or perfect circumstances. It has always been about two people learning that God's grace can bring healing, wisdom, and hope even after seasons of heartbreak. Whether the future held more joyful chapters together or new paths shaped by His purpose, they had discovered something that could never be taken away: a deeper faith, stronger character, and hearts transformed by love rooted in truth. As they walked into the sunset, they no longer feared tomorrow. They trusted that the God who had guided them through every tear, every prayer, every lesson, and every new beginning would continue leading each step with perfect wisdom. And as the next chapter quietly began, they understood that the most beautiful love stories are not written in a single day. They are written through countless ordinary moments where faith overcomes fear, forgiveness triumphs over pride, hope rises above disappointment, and God's unfailing love remains the light that guides every step forward. My beloved child, listen carefully, because this chapter begins on a quiet evening when the world outside seemed unchanged, yet two hearts had begun seeing life through completely different eyes. Don't skip. Stay till the end, because the next lesson is not about dramatic miracles or impossible promises. It is about discovering that the strongest relationships are built one faithful day at a time. After everything they had experienced together, they no longer rushed to define the future. Instead, they chose to appreciate the present. Every conversation became more meaningful. Every smile carried greater gratitude. Every moment reminded them that healing is not a destination reached overnight but a journey walked together with patience, honesty, and God's guidance. What happened next changed everything. As another week quietly passed, they found themselves meeting more often, not because they felt obligated, but because peace had replaced pressure. They would sit on a quiet park bench for hours, speaking about dreams they had never shared before. Sometimes they laughed until tears filled their eyes. Other times they simply enjoyed the silence, knowing that not every meaningful moment requires words. They discovered that real connection grows strongest when two people feel safe enough to be completely themselves without pretending to be perfect. Listen carefully, because this changes everything. One afternoon, while helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries into her home, the woman smiled warmly and said, "The happiest couples I've ever known weren't the ones who never faced difficulties. They were the ones who refused to stop choosing kindness during difficult times." Those simple words stayed with them for days. They realized that love is not measured by grand romantic gestures alone. It is revealed through everyday faithfulness, gentle words, patient listening, and the quiet decision to remain respectful even when emotions become complicated. My beloved child, another unforgettable lesson unfolded during the following Sunday. They attended a community gathering where families, friends, and neighbors shared meals together. Watching children laugh freely and older couples smile at one another reminded them that every lasting relationship grows through countless ordinary moments. No one could see the years of forgiveness, sacrifice, encouragement, and perseverance hidden behind those smiles. They understood that every joyful ending is built upon thousands of faithful choices made when no one else was watching. Stay till the end, because another beautiful moment quietly arrived. As the evening came to an end, they stood beneath a sky filled with brilliant stars. One of them softly said, "I used to pray for God to change my circumstances. Now I thank Him for changing my heart first." The other smiled gently and replied, "Perhaps that's why we can finally understand each other now." Neither of them claimed to know exactly what tomorrow would bring. Instead, they chose to trust that every step taken with humility, honesty, and faith would lead them exactly where they needed to go. Days slowly became months, and something remarkable happened. The fear of losing one another no longer controlled every decision. Instead, trust began replacing anxiety. They learned to celebrate each other's successes without comparison, support one another through disappointments without judgment, and encourage one another to continue growing in faith. Their relationship was no longer centered on emotional excitement alone. It was becoming rooted in mutual respect, compassion, and a shared desire to honor God in the way they treated one another. Listen carefully, because another truth is beginning to shine brighter than ever before. Life continued bringing unexpected challenges. There were moments when plans changed, when difficult conversations were necessary, and when patience was tested. Yet every challenge became another opportunity to choose love over pride, forgiveness over resentment, and understanding over assumptions. They realized that lasting peace is not created by avoiding conflict. It grows when two people face life's difficulties with honesty, grace, and a willingness to keep learning together. Don't skip this final moment, because another chapter is already waiting beyond today's page. The journey ahead remained unwritten, but they no longer feared the unknown. They had discovered something far greater than certainty. They had found the quiet confidence that God can guide every faithful step, strengthen every willing heart, and bring hope into every season. As they walked beneath the evening sky, they understood that love is not proven by one extraordinary day. It is revealed through thousands of ordinary days filled with kindness, patience, prayer, forgiveness, and unwavering faith. Whatever tomorrow might hold, they chose to place it into God's hands, trusting that the author of every good story would continue writing each chapter with wisdom, mercy, purpose, and everlasting love. And as they walked forward side by side, they smiled, not because they finally knew the ending, but because they had learned to trust the one who does. My beloved child, listen carefully, because this chapter begins just as another season quietly arrives. Don't skip. Stay till the end, because although many pages of this story have already been written, the most meaningful lesson has not yet been revealed. The days continued passing, but something inside both hearts remained different. They no longer counted how many messages had been exchanged or how many hours had passed between conversations. They had learned that true peace does not come from constant reassurance. It comes from trusting God even when every detail of tomorrow remains unseen. That quiet confidence became the strongest foundation either of them had ever known. What happened next changed everything. One cool autumn evening they returned to the small riverside where so many important conversations had taken place. The gentle breeze carried golden leaves across the water as the sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon. For several minutes they simply stood together, saying nothing. The silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt peaceful. It was the kind of silence shared by two people who no longer needed perfect words to understand each other. Sometimes God's greatest healing takes place when hearts become quiet enough to recognize His presence without distraction. Listen carefully, because this changes everything. One of them finally spoke, their voice almost trembling. There was a time when I thought losing you would be the end of my story. But now I realize God was never trying to end my story. He was teaching me how to become someone capable of loving with patience instead of fear. The other lowered their eyes as tears quietly formed. They whispered, and he was teaching me that pride can keep us separated longer than distance ever could. Neither of them tried to erase the past. Instead, they thanked God for using every painful chapter to build greater wisdom than they could have gained through comfort alone. My beloved child, another unforgettable lesson quietly unfolded during the weeks that followed. They began serving together at a local ministry every Saturday morning. They packed food boxes for families, visited elderly neighbors who lived alone, and spent time encouraging people who felt forgotten. As they served others, something remarkable happened. Their own worries became smaller. Their conversations became deeper. Their gratitude became greater. They realized that relationships become stronger when two people stop focusing only on themselves and begin sharing God's love with those around them. Compassion became the language that strengthened every part of their journey. Stay till the end, because another beautiful moment is waiting. One evening after volunteering, they sat outside watching children laugh and play nearby. One child accidentally dropped a small paper kite into a puddle. At first the child cried, believing it was ruined forever. But the father gently picked it up, repaired the torn corner, and together they watched it rise into the evening sky once again. Your special person quietly smiled because the simple picture reminded them of their own journey. Broken things are not always finished. With patience, care, forgiveness, and God's grace, many things can be restored in beautiful ways. Listen carefully, because another truth is beginning to shine. They no longer prayed only for their own happiness. They prayed that wherever life led them, they would become people who reflected Christ's love. They prayed for wisdom before speaking, humility before judging, courage before making difficult decisions, and compassion before reacting in anger. Day after day, those prayers slowly changed the way they lived. Their relationship became healthier because both hearts continued allowing God to shape them first. As winter slowly approached, they noticed something neither of them had expected. Joy had returned in quiet ways. It appeared in simple conversations over warm coffee. It appeared in shared prayers before meals. It appeared while reading scripture together on peaceful evenings. It appeared in ordinary moments that once seemed insignificant. They realized that happiness often depends on circumstances, but joy grows wherever God's presence is welcomed. That joy became stronger than fear, stronger than uncertainty, and stronger than every painful memory they had once carried. Don't skip this final moment, because another chapter is already waiting beyond today's page. The future still held questions, just as every human life does. But those questions no longer created fear. They had discovered that God's faithfulness is greater than uncertainty, His wisdom is greater than confusion, and His love is stronger than every disappointment they had ever faced. Hand in hand, they continued walking forward, not because they knew exactly what tomorrow would bring, but because they trusted the one who had faithfully carried them through every yesterday. Every sunrise became another reminder of His mercy. Every prayer became another conversation with the one who never stopped listening. Every act of kindness became another reflection of His heart. And as the story continued unfolding, they understood that the most beautiful love stories are not written by perfect people. They are written by imperfect people who continue choosing faith over fear, forgiveness over pride, hope over despair, and God's unfailing love above everything else. The author of their story was still writing, and the most beautiful pages were still waiting to be revealed. My beloved child, listen carefully, because this chapter begins on a morning that neither of them expected to remember forever. Don't skip. Stay till the end, because some of God's greatest lessons arrive so quietly that many people almost miss them. The first rays of sunlight slipped through the window as they each began another ordinary day. Nothing extraordinary seemed to be happening. The streets were busy, birds sang from the trees, and life moved forward just as it always had. Yet deep within their hearts, something was changing once again. They had stopped asking, "When will everything finally be perfect?" Instead, they had begun asking, "Lord, help us become faithful in whatever season we are living today." That simple prayer became the beginning of another beautiful chapter. As they continued growing closer, they noticed that their conversations had become different. They no longer spent hours talking about old misunderstandings. Instead, they spoke about the future they hoped to build, not through impossible promises, but through daily faithfulness. They shared dreams of serving others, encouraging their families, growing stronger in faith, and becoming people who reflected God's love wherever they went. Every conversation ended with gratitude rather than fear. Every goodbye carried hope instead of uncertainty. They finally understood that genuine love always points people toward peace, not endless confusion. Listen carefully, because this changes everything. One of them slowly reached into a pocket and unfolded a small piece of paper that had become worn with time. It was an old prayer they had written during their darkest season. The words were simple: "Father, if this relationship is meant to continue, prepare us both. But above all, prepare our hearts to trust you, no matter what happens." Looking at that prayer now, tears quietly filled their eyes. They smiled because they realized God had answered every line, not always in the way they expected, but in the way they truly needed. Before restoring hope, He had restored character. Before rebuilding trust, He had built wisdom. Before opening new doors, He had strengthened their faith. My beloved child, they no longer looked at one another through the lens of old mistakes. They chose to see one another through the grace that God had shown them both. The past no longer defined their future. Forgiveness had broken the chains that regret once held so tightly. Every painful chapter had become a testimony of God's patience and mercy. They understood that every scar told a story, not of defeat, but of healing. Every difficult season had become evidence that God never abandons those who continue placing their hope in Him. Stay till the end, because the most beautiful moment is still waiting. As darkness gently covered the sky, countless stars appeared above them, shining with quiet brilliance. One of them softly whispered, "Do you remember when we thought everything was over?" The other smiled through grateful tears and replied, "Now I realize it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of becoming the people God wanted us to be." They laughed gently, remembering how desperately they had once tried to control every outcome. Now they understood that surrendering their future into God's hands had brought more peace than striving ever could. Then they bowed their heads together and prayed. Heavenly Father, thank you for every lesson hidden inside our waiting, every blessing we almost overlooked, every challenge that strengthened our faith, and every act of mercy that carried us when we felt too weak to continue. Thank you for teaching us that love is more than emotion. It is patience, kindness, humility, forgiveness, truth, and faithfulness. Help us continue living in a way that honors you, encourages others, and reflects your endless love. Guide every step we take, and let our lives always point back to your goodness. Amen. When they lifted their heads, nothing around them had dramatically changed. The stars were still shining. The breeze still moved through the trees. The world continued exactly as it had before. Yet everything was different because their hearts were different. They no longer feared tomorrow. They no longer carried yesterday's burdens. They no longer searched for certainty in temporary things. Their confidence rested in God's faithful presence, knowing that whatever the future held, they would never walk through it alone. My beloved child, as this story comes to its final page, remember this truth above everything else. Every season has a purpose, every prayer is heard, every act of kindness matters, and every heart can be renewed by God's grace. Whether relationships are restored, new paths unfold, or unexpected opportunities arise, His love remains constant through every chapter of life. So walk into tomorrow with courage instead of fear. Choose forgiveness instead of resentment. Choose hope instead of despair. Choose faith instead of worry. Let your words bring healing, your actions reflect compassion, and your life become a testimony of God's goodness. The greatest miracle in this story was never simply that two people found their way back to one another. The greatest miracle was that they found their way back to God, and in doing so discovered peace that no circumstance could ever steal. As they walked toward the horizon hand in hand, the first light of a new dawn began to rise. It was not the end of their story. It was the beginning of a new life built on faith, gratitude, humility, and enduring love. And the author of their story smiled, for the most beautiful chapters were still being written, one faithful step at a time. The end, and the beginning of something even greater.